Is Kelsey going to turn her life around? What are we meant to make of Abby's storyline? And can you really go to jail just for fiddling the lecky? We'll be discussing these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review, and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the first episode of the second series of Time, the Jimmy McGovern prison drama. Let's jump straight in. The episode starts with Orla, who's busy getting her kids off to school. It's a bit chaotic, but I think the idea we're supposed to get from this scene is that she's a busy mum who's just about coping on her own with 3 challenging kids. She's obviously a bit rough around the edges, but for reasons that aren't currently clear, she's dressed very smartly. The next shot explains her clothes, because she's in the back of a prison transport vehicle after a court hearing. Clearly she wasn't expecting her hearing to end up with her going to jail, and is panicking that she's missed the school pickup. Her concerns are completely ignored by the people driving the prison transport, but one of the other prisoners tells her that she'll get a phone call when she gets to the prison. Then we meet Kelsey, who seems a lot more familiar with the criminal justice system. As she's being booked in, she seems to know exactly what to say to get the maximum amount of methadone. Orla explains to one of the guards that she had gone into the court hearing thinking she couldn't get a prison sentence, so hadn't made any arrangements for her children's care. The third prisoner, Abby, is a transfer from Birchway Prison. She says it was bad there for 3.5 years, and then it got worse, but doesn't go into specifics. So far, we've not been given much to go on about this character. As Kelsey is having a nurse consultation about her methadone request, she does a routine pregnancy test which comes back positive. At first she refuses to accept it, but then seems to acknowledge that it's probably accurate after all. The women are shown to the wing where they have their induction for their first week in prison. This is more like how jail is usually shown on TV, but after that they move to a more low security sort of setup. Orla thinks her friend Maggie will have picked up her kids and needs to check, but she isn't allowed her phone to look up her number. The only number she has memorised is her alcoholic mother, so she has to use her one phone call on her. Her mum is obviously drunk when she calls, but sobers up just about enough to understand what's going on. She offers to have the kids when Orla explains the situation, but her daughter says that can't happen. Instead she says she needs to see her friend Maggie and explain the situation, apologise, and get her number so she can pass it on to Orla tomorrow. Then Orla asks the guard if she can have 2 calls tomorrow, so she can call her mum first to get Maggie's number, then call Maggie. Initially the request is rejected, but the guard can see how desperate her situation is and agrees to bend the rules and let her have 2 calls, to Orla's immense gratitude. Despite the fact she just helped her out, the guard lets Orla know that they're not friends by correcting her. Orla called her love when she'd been talking to her. The guard tells her that it's got to be Miss or Miss Martin. It's one of dozens of little ways that Orla doesn't understand how prison works and isn't ready for this kind of environment. Kelsey smuggled drugs in with her and hurriedly smokes them as soon as the cell is locked for the night, much to the disgust of Abby on the top bunk. Clearly she's not too concerned about taking care of her unborn baby. One of the other inmates shouts out from another cell, asking the 3 new prisoners what they're in for, so we find out that as well as Orla being in for fiddling an electric meter, Kelsey's in for drugs, which sounds a bit nondescript, and Abby is doing life for killing her sister-in-law. The next morning at the dispensary, Kelsey's not given any methadone. The guards checked in on her during the night and saw her sleeping soundly when she should have been in the middle of heroin withdrawal because of her significant habit. She tries to plead that she only slept so well because she smuggled heroin into the prison, but is warned not to repeat that story too loudly and has to walk off without any morphine for that day. Mary Louise, a dressed-down nun from the chaplaincy team, comes to see Orla to help her make her phone calls and do some do-gooding. She's the only returning character from the first series of Time, as far as I can tell. When Orla calls her mum again, it's not good news. Her mum has ignored her instructions and taken the kids on herself. From our perspective, as the audience, it seems like Orla is being unreasonably harsh on her mum, who is just trying to help, until we find out the reason she doesn't want her mum to help is because she's a raging alcoholic who won't be able to curb her drinking enough to take adequate care of the kids. The heartbreaking thing for Orla is that there's no other options when she's stuck in prison, other than allowing the kids to be taken into the care of social services. Her mother promises not to drink while she's looking after the children, but Orla has heard these excuses before when she was a child and knows her mother can't keep them. When the cells are locked up for the night, Keely pulls out more heroin that she's somehow got hold of and starts to get high. Abby asks if she plans to keep the baby, and when Kelsey says she intends to have an abortion, Abby points out that judges tend to look favourably upon pregnant women when it comes to sentencing. Kelsey seems genuinely grateful for this advice from her cellmate, and it seems like a bond is forming. Then the bond quickly evaporates the next morning when Abby discovers that Kelsey obtained her heroin by trading her hair oil and cream with one of the other inmates. After giving off the impression that she's a calm and mild-mannered kind of a woman, Abby goes off the deep end about the missing oil and cream, storming through the block and demanding to know who traded with Kelsey. Nobody confesses to doing the trade, so Abby slaps the information out of Kelsey, who quickly confesses it was Tanya. Abby takes back her possessions, and quite reasonably points out that the hair products state Afro on the label, and Tanya should really have known that Kelsey had stolen it off her cellmate. After all this commotion, a softly spoken but menacing inmate comes into Abby's cell and tells her that she knows who she really killed, and it wasn't her sister-in-law. Abby works out that this woman wants some sort of preferential treatment from her in exchange for her silence. She tells her that she'll think about whether to accept the blackmail offer or not. In the next scene, we see Abby talking to Mary Louise about her crime. It's a strange interaction because it seems at first like the two women are connecting, but then Abby hardens up and talks about how she's had other prison chaplains try to connect with her in the past, and she doubts their motives. It seems like it's going to take time for her to be willing to open up about her past. Abby then goes to see the woman that tried to blackmail her, tells her that she won't stand for it. Instead, she makes a death threat to the woman, explaining that she's already serving life, so more years in a sentence won't be that much of a big deal to her. It's a bold move. Tanya then beats Kelsey up for trading Abby's hair cream and oil for heroin, which seems a bit harsh, but I suppose this is prison, not primary school, and everything isn't always fair. Things at least get a bit better for Kelsey at the dispensary when she finds out that she's been given a little pot of methadone, which she guzzles down greedily. Then the prisoners are out of the block and shown to their cabins. They're no longer locked up in cells, instead they're in blocks which are more like student halls of residence, with 5 bedrooms, a shared living room and a shared kitchen. In fact, a lot of students don't get that kind of luxury, and I know many Londoners would be salivating at the square footage and offer in these kind of living spaces. But let's get back to the story. We then have a time jump to the first visit. Ola's relief at seeing her children is short-lived when she sees they're upset about being searched by dogs. Ola is outraged that the guards would suspect her children of being used to smuggle drugs into the prison. But on the other side of the room, we see they're right to be suspicious of visitors. Kelsey's partner Adam has smuggled in a treat for her, and I don't mean a scented candle. Somewhat ironically, the commotion Ola causes about being outraged about her children being sniffed by dogs for drugs creates the distraction Kelsey needs to pop the drugs she's been given into her prison pocket without detection. Kelsey tells her partner Adam that she's pregnant, and he's not exactly bursting with delight to find out he's going to become a father. Instead, they discuss the practical implications on her sentencing and how she'll be allowed to raise the baby inside the prison in the mother and baby unit in Carlinghow. She's been told by Abby that the judge is likely to sentence her to 3 years, as that will mean the amount of time she actually serves will cover her through the pregnancy and up until the baby turns 18 months, which is the maximum age of children allowed in the unit. Adam is less than impressed by Kelsey's master plan. Perhaps the fact that she's addicted to heroin might be a factor in his concern, or the fact that his child will be starting life in prison. I can't imagine that would have featured in anyone's life plan. However, Kelsey seems crushed that he's not supporting her plan to keep the baby. Abby also has a visitor. Her husband has come to tell her that he wants to sell the house and needs her signature. Abby had hoped it would be a social visit, but there's obviously unresolved business between the two of them, so he's only come to ensure she signs the paperwork so the house sale can go through. Abby tells him that he can keep her share of the house sale profits, but he insists that she should have it. Ola checks in with her children about how they're getting on, but it's clear from the conversation that her kids are saying what she wants to hear and not telling the truth. She also grills her mum about whether she's been drinking and asks the kids for verification when she says she hasn't. Then the visit is interrupted when the quietly spoken bullies visitor starts shouting about how Abby's a baby killer. It's obvious from Abby's reaction that there's some truth in the accusation. She leaves the visiting room, clearly rattled. The prison officers say they can move her back to the cells in the wing for her own protection, but Abby refuses the offer. After the visit, Tanya confronts Abby back in the block living area and makes it clear things are now changed for her. Then she tells Kelsey to give her the drugs that she smuggled into the prison. Kelsey plays dumb, so Tanya and her friend violate her in a pretty horrible and intimate way. Outside of prison, this kind of thing would probably land them both in prison, but inside it seems to be just the way things are done. When Kelsey gets back to the bedroom, Abby tells her and Ola that they now have to keep the bedroom door locked at night and wake her up if they leave the room for any reason. She fears for her life now that everybody knows her secret. That night, Abby has a flashback to standing on a beach. Her hair is unkempt, and she looks frazzled. She's walking out into the sea with her clothes on, in the classic, I can't cope anymore way that people often do. Then we see Ola on the phone to her boss, who's letting her job go. She makes the point that she'll be out in a few weeks, because despite getting 6 months, she'll only have to serve 3 months, and they could just cover her absence for a few weeks. Then she reveals the grim maths of her situation. If she loses her job, she'll only be able to get a minimum wage job to replace it, which would be £40 a week less. But the job she had still wasn't enough to cover all her bills, which led her to needing to fiddle the electric meter in the first place, which put her in prison and meant she lost her job. Regardless of Ola's pleas, her boss lets her go, which leads her to losing her temper, and as well as lashing out at her now ex-boss, and Kelsey, she calls Abby a baby killer and says she doesn't want to share a cell with her. The guard comes in at the sound of the commotion and asks if she wants to transfer, but she calms down when she finds out transferring involves paperwork. Kelsey gets taken to the hospital for a scan, and it's pretty sad seeing her in the waiting room with the other expecting mothers. She's sat chained to a prison officer, while the rest are in there planning very different futures for them and their babies. There aren't any lines of dialogue in this scene, but there's a lot communicated in Kelsey's facial expressions and body language. During the scan, Kelsey tells the nurse that she's on methadone and looks pretty ashamed of herself. I think seeing the baby on the screen is making her realise that she's growing an actual living thing inside her, rather than just a ticket to a shorter sentence. Then later at the dispensary, Kelsey asks the nurse to reduce her dosage. This is first met by suspicion, and then by a sort of guarded delight by the nurse. It's a nice moment because you can see that the nurse is really pleased with her for taking a healthy decision for her and the baby, but not really giving much away at the same time. Because this is a Jimmy McGovern drama, this lighter, more optimistic scene is quickly overshadowed in the next scene by a moment of crushing despair. Orla gets a visit from her mum, but not her children. Her mum has started drinking again, not taking good care of the kids, and they've been taken into foster care. Orla should have been informed of all this, but for some reason the message didn't get passed on to her by the prison. She tries to talk to the reception at the prison, but they fob her off. Tanya comes in and tells her that the only way to speak to the governor is to cut yourself. It sounds like the prison governor has a similar policy to my broadband provider's customer service team. Regardless, Orla is so desperate she takes Tanya's shoddy advice and uses the razor she gives her to slash her arm open. Having been critical of Tanya's slash your arms until you get your own way advice, it does seem to pretty much work. The guy in the suit that turns up makes a big deal about how cutting your arms doesn't get you to see the governor, but it does, it seems, get you to see the deputy governor, which is good enough to get Orla's case investigated. He apologises to her and tells her that 2 letters from social services were received by the prison about her children being taken into care, but just not passed on to her. It seems pretty immoral that the correspondence as important as that can just get misplaced, but the deputy governor cites how they're short-staffed and can't cope, which isn't really a good enough excuse for Orla, whose children are now in foster care and she's no longer able to do anything to fight it because it's all too late. Orla then finds out that she won't be able to get her children back when she leaves prison because she'll be living with her mother to start with, and social services won't be willing to put her kids back into that house. So Orla will need to get back into work and find a new place to live before her children can come back to her. She's completely distraught by this news. I feel like all prison dramas have a shower scene. It's almost compulsory. They can often be quite grisly too. There are worrying omens when we see that Abby's distracted by haunting baby cries while she showers. Could this be when she gets jumped while her guard is down? Mercifully not, despite there being a few hints that it might be coming. Thankfully, in this episode, the shower scene is really just a cruel prank we see played on Abby. Someone steals her towel and she's forced to walk naked back through the block back to her room. Rather than embarrassed or intimidated, Abby takes it in her stride and doesn't let the other prisoners see that this kind of behaviour bothers her. After Abby's dried off, she goes back to the living area and has a go at the women for being so judgmental of her and her crimes. Tanya interrupts her monologue with a headbutt, but then Abby fights back and gets the better of the brawl that ensues. Then we see another staple of prison dramas, the improvised homemade weapon, as Tanya creates a shiv with the creative use of a disposable razor and cigarette lighter. Tanya tries to get into Abby's bedroom in the middle of the night, but the door is locked so she can't get in to cut her. Kelsey spots her from the other end of the corridor, though, and knows how close she came, so the next day she tells the guard about Tanya's blade. The guards toss Tanya's bedroom, which is another required scene from any good prison drama, and they find the shiv hidden above her bunk. She's dragged out of the block, but as she's taken away, she spits an accusation that Abby's grassed on her. Pretty much the worst thing you can be in prison, alongside being a baby killer. Abby protests to the others that she's not a grass, but they don't look like they're buying it. Then we skip forward to the day that Orla is released, 91 days into her sentence. She's only been inside for 3 months, but it's been long enough to completely destroy her life. Then Tanya's bunkmate comes in to see Abby and asks if she'll investigate a lump that she has because she used to be a nurse. Abby agrees, being a bit too trusting really. When she carries out the examination, she can't find any lump, and for some reason alarm bells don't start ringing until it's too late and her face has been badly slashed by a razor blade. If we were in any doubt, she tells Kelsey as she's leaving that this attack was for grassing on Tanya. Then the credits roll. Jimmy McGovern doesn't make light-hearted whimsical dramas, so there weren't many laughs to be had in this hour of TV. But if you like gritty, grim reality, acted note perfectly, then you couldn't really ask for more from an episode than this. I was gripped for every moment as we got to know the characters of Carlinghouse Prison, and watched as the prison exerted its influence on their lives. I think it was a good decision to move the second series of Time to a completely different prison, and making it a women's prison opened up a lot of different storylines and possibilities. The variety of different stories available to explore may be why this series chose to have 3 central inmate characters, when the first series focused mostly on one prisoner and one guard. I only feature shows on my channel that I enjoy, so it shouldn't be a surprise to hear that I loved this episode. I think the writing and the acting were absolutely superb. Both were understated in a way that British and particularly BBC dramas do so well. The direction was plain and unfancy, but I think that's what was needed to give the performances and the writing the platform that they needed to shine. Prison is an unglamorous and harsh environment, and the director did a good job of getting that across. As for the main storylines, I find myself most affected by Orla's situation. It seems like the criminal justice system has been particularly cruel to her. While there's no debate about whether she broke the law or not by meddling with her electricity meter, the fact that she was committing a crime to help her and her family survive makes it seem harsh that her first offence saw her end up in jail, particularly when the butterfly effect of that decision saw her whole life collapse like a house of cards, with her home, job and children all gone by the end of the episode. It was heartbreaking seeing those scenes where Orla knew what was going to happen with her mum involved, but her incarceration meant she couldn't do anything to stop it. Kelsey's situation was grim for another reason. She's imprisoned for having a kilo of Class A drugs on her, and is waiting to find out how long her sentence will be, and decides to keep a baby almost as a bargaining chip to reduce the time she's going to spend inside. In fairness, the scenes where she goes for a scan seem to suggest that she may be contemplating her life choices more, and the fact that she's trying to get off the methadone suggests she wants to clean up her act a bit. It's still a sad situation, though, and prison is not an ideal place to bring a baby up. Abby's story is more morally complex than the other two. With her crime being something utterly awful, most dramas would portray her as a villain, but in time she's more of a complicated character. Not innocent, but we're invited to see her perspective and to understand that the vigilante justice that the inmates seek against her is wrong, even if the anger they feel against her crimes may be something that we can all relate to, at least in part. I think that this was a good start to the second series of Time, and after following the first series that won BAFTAs, it wasn't an easy act to follow. Keeping the same tone, but shifting the focus to different stories and a different prison and a different gender of inmate has made for an interesting direction for this series to go, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the remaining 2 episodes. My favourite line in this episode came from Orla when she said, "When I came in here, I had a house, a job, and a family. Now I've got nothing." This came after she found out that her children had been taken into foster care. It makes me sound a bit callous to say that I enjoyed this line, but I think what I mean when I say I enjoyed this line is that it really encapsulates all the story in just one line and sums up how awfully the prison system has destroyed her life for a crime that didn't really seem worth that kind of punishment. Women make up about 4% of the prison population in the UK, with about 3,200 women in prison as of July 2022. So it seems that given that women make up a fairly small chunk of prisoners, they have a disproportionate number of dramas made about them. I don't have the data about other countries, but I guess the proportions would be roughly the same. Despite that most prisoners are usually men, it seems that drama makers are more keen to tell stories about female prisoners. As well as this series, there's Orange is the New Black, Prison Cell Block H, and Wentworth, which is a remake of Prison Cell Block H. I've got a feeling there are others out there as well, so feel free to tell me in the comments if you know of any other female prison dramas. I thought it was a bit odd that prisoners were allowed to have razor blades in prison, and I wondered if some dramatic license had been used because blades were needed for Orla to cut herself to get the governor's attention, and for Abby to have her face slashed at the end of this episode. But a quick Google search led me to a government guidance document that clearly shows that open-type prisons allow razors as long as they're not open-bladed types. So disposable razors would be fine, until you split them open and use a cigarette lighter to turn them into a shiv, obviously. While I was doing some research, I also looked at the prison sentences that the main characters received. Kelsey talked about how she was expected to get at least 6 years for getting caught with a kilo of Class A drugs. For this kind of offence, the sentence will depend on the circumstances surrounding your case, but people caught with similar quantities have tended to go down for between 4 and 7 years, from what I could tell, so it seems about right. And it doesn't seem crazy that a sentence might be reduced if she was bringing up a baby, and therefore a shorter sentence could give the baby a better chance of staying with her mother, rather than being brought up in foster care. I can see why creating these kinds of incentives seems bonkers, but equally, I can understand a judge's motivation to want to avoid a child being brought up in the care system, if they cannot all avoid it. Which also, when you think about it, makes Orla's case all the more crazy. Speaking of Orla, she broke Section 135 of the Electricity Act when she fiddled with the lecky. It's punishable by up to 3 years in prison, a fine, or both, but if the scale of the theft is significant, the sentence could go up to 5 years. In practice, she was probably unlucky to go to jail for a first offence. I suspect most people would receive a fine and a warning not to do it again. Orla is supposed to live in Huddersfield, but when she's asked to call her mum, she gives an 01632 area code. I have a slightly weird mind, so I know the area codes for quite a few different places, and I know this definitely isn't a Huddersfield one, but couldn't work out which one it was, so I did some digging. Interestingly, the area code is the old one for Newcastle upon Tyne, but hasn't been used for decades, so the phone number Orla gives out couldn't possibly be the right number. Despite the next 2 episodes being immediately available on the iPlayer after the first episode aired, I've deliberately avoided watching them until I've made this video, to make sure I don't spoil it for myself, so I don't know exactly what happens next. However, it does seem likely that the rest of the series is going to focus on Orla's attempts to rebuild her life after her release. We're also going to see Kelsey's pregnancy develop and her baby arrive while she hopefully continues to stay off the drugs and rehabilitates herself. Then we'll see how Abby copes with the nasty facial injury she received, whether she can cope with the label of being a baby killer, and if she can live with the demons of her crime, which still seem to be haunting her. With it being a Jimmy McGovern drama, it's pointless to expect a happy ending, as he tends to specialise in piling misery upon his characters, so expect to see plenty more tears and unpleasantness. If I'm being honest, I'm quite looking forward to it. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you've watched this far, it means you've probably enjoyed it, and you'll want to know when the next one comes out for episode 2. The best way to make sure you don't miss it is to subscribe, so please click subscribe now and press the notification button. I'll be uploading my next video shortly after episode 2 airs on BBC One. Thank you, goodbye.